Guys, soon Westeros will get a new HBO series that promises to show a side of this universe we've never seen before, the Hedge Knight. A more intimate story, full of mysteries, tournaments, intrigue, and secrets that could change the future of House Targaryen. In today's video, I'm going to explain absolutely everything about the series, from the main characters to the supporting cast, conflicts, the timeline, and even a segment with the complete story, including spoilers, at the end of the video, revealing what really happens in the tales that inspired this adaptation. Get ready, because there's going to be a ton of information here to get you hyped for this new HBO project. But before we dive headfirst into the video, make sure you're subscribed here to Rolo do Drageo and hit the like button below, because I'm going to cover every detail of this new series from the trailer to the very last episode. Deal? Alright, let's get into the video. First of all, we need to understand that, unlike Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, guys, the Hedge Knight isn't going to show huge wars, kingdoms in flames, or dragons flying across the skies all the time. But that doesn't mean the series is going to be boring or any less interesting. Quite the opposite. The Hedge Knight goes for a much more intimate story, full of intrigue, tournaments, rivalries among nobles, and secrets that can surprise even the most seasoned fans of Westeros. One really interesting thing for those who aren't familiar with this story is the timeline. The series takes place almost 100 years before the events of Game of Thrones, and about 80 years before House of the Dragon. During this period, dragons no longer exist, but House Targaryen still firmly holds power, ruling from the Iron Throne. The focus of this journey is a character named Dunk, or Duncan, a humble Hedge Knight. That's where the name the Hedge Knight comes from. Alongside him is his young squire Egg, a clever and enigmatic boy who carries a secret, mysterious identity that will only be revealed later on. It's precisely this mix of personal adventure, unlikely friendship, and political connections that makes the series so special. It's a very different view of Westeros, more down-to-earth, but it still shows how seemingly ordinary people can influence the fate of the entire kingdom. Just like House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones, this series is based on the books by George R.R. Martin, which bring together the tales of Dunk and Egg. So far, there are 3 published stories. The first is The Hedge Knight, the second is The Sworn Sword, and the third is The Mystery Knight. As far as we know, George R.R. Martin plans to publish 5 more stories in this saga. However, all the books are currently on hold in terms of writing. But leaving the controversy aside, it's exactly these 3 published stories that will inspire the 3 already confirmed seasons of the series. The first season, in turn, is expected to adapt The Hedge Knight and is already completely filmed, set to premiere in January 2026. The second season is currently being filmed in 2025, and the third should come right after. HBO's idea here, folks, is to release 1 season per year, since it's a much simpler production to film, without dragons or big battles. By the way, just letting you know, for anyone who wants to check out the original story, I'll leave the link to the book here in the comments, which has all 3 stories in full for the best price I could find. If you buy using this link, besides getting the book to read, you'll also be helping out our channel, alright? Alright, let's get back to the video. Before we get into spoilers, I want to explain to you who the main characters are and what the plot is, what's the synopsis of the Hedge Knight and the story itself that we're going to see in the first season. As I said before, it should adapt the first tale of this saga, the Hedge Knight. The Hedge Knight is a very short and fast-paced story, but it's fantastic. Its entire plot revolves around the so-called Ashford tournament. However, even before the tournament, Dunk's story is already marked by fate. He was just a squire, serving a Hedge Knight named Ser Arlen of Pennytree. Dunk didn't come from any important house. He had no titles or wealth. Only the desire to learn. One striking characteristic of this character was his height. According to the books, he was about 7 feet tall, and because of that, he became known as Duncan the Tall. Right at the beginning of the tale, Ser Arlen, who took care of Duncan, ends up dying, and then Duncan decides to take on the role of knight for himself. With the armor and horses he inherited from his master, he sets out alone on the roads of Westeros in search of an uncertain future. It's at this point in the story that Duncan learns about the Ashford tournament and decides to go there, seeing it as a chance to prove his worth as a potential knight. On the way to the tournament, Dunk ends up meeting a skinny, small, persistent boy with a shaved head who introduces himself only as Egg. Even though Dunk is against it at first, the boy won't leave him alone and eventually becomes his squire. He's called Egg, which means egg in English, precisely because of his shaved, white head that makes the boy look like a human egg. This unlikely and even somewhat strange encounter is what kicks off one of the most iconic partnerships in Westeros. And it's together that they arrive at the Great Tournament. And from there, the duo crosses paths with characters who will leave a deep mark on their lives. Among the Targaryen princes, for example, each one plays a very specific role. Starting with the famous Aerion Targaryen, a cruel, arrogant prince who stirs up tension every time he appears. He is the complete opposite of Baelor Breakspear, who is remembered as a just and respected prince, someone who seems born to inspire honor. In the midst of all this is Mikar Targaryen, a strict, severe, and demanding character, and also the eccentric Daeron Targaryen. However, this is not the Daeron from House of the Dragon. This one became known as the Drunkard, which shows the fragile and unpredictable side of the Targaryen family. During this period, the one ruling the Seven Kingdoms, folks, is Daeron II Targaryen, who became known as Daeron the Good, seeking peace and stability, and who hasn't appeared at this tournament yet. Among the lords and knights, we also have important players on this board, like Olenn Baratheon, the Laughing Storm, who commands attention with his impulsive and charismatic manner. Then there are the Fossway cousins, Steffan and Raymond. They start out as allies, but end up going down different paths, showing that even within the same family, the tournament creates divisions. Throughout this tournament, besides the big names, there are also characters who help bring the story to life. Right from the start, we remember Ser Alan of Pennytree, Duncan's mentor, whose death pushed the young man onto this new journey. In Ashford, we also see Septon Blamer, always making his rounds and watching the competitors, almost like the voice of reason and morality amid so much ambition. At the Forges, we have the blacksmith Stealing Peak, who appears preparing weapons and armor, reminding us that behind every joust there is hard work. Among the knights, we also have names like Humphrey Hunter and Manfrey Londario, who make brief appearances in the competitions, highlighting the diversity of the houses present from Westeros. It's also there that Duncan encounters Tencel, a Dornish performer who appears during the festivities and ends up leaving an unexpected mark on his heart. It reminds us that even in such a brutal world, there is still room for beauty and humanity. Each of these characters from the Hedge Knight isn't there by accident. They interact, clash, and test one another. The tournament, in the end, becomes a miniature portrait of Westeros, full of politics, rivalries, and decisions that change destinies. It's in this melting pot that Duncan and Egg have to prove who they really are and find out just how far this unlikely journey can take them. Now that we've talked about the characters, it's time to dive into the plot itself. And here, folks, comes a very important warning. From this point on, we're going to talk about spoilers for the novella The Hedge Knight, which is likely the basis for the first season of the series, alright? It all starts when Duncan, newly knighted after Ser Arlen's death, decides to enter the Ashford tournament to prove his worth. He has no name, no sigil, just the courage and the will to stand among the greats of Westeros. On the way, he crosses paths with a bald, odd-looking boy who insists on introducing himself and asks to follow him. This boy ends up getting the nickname Egg because he looks like a human egg, and even though Duncan is reluctant at first, he starts accompanying him as his squire. It's in this unlikely way that the partnership is born, one that will shape the entire story. Their relationship starts off with suspicion. Duncan sees Egg as nothing but a nuisance, a scrawny kid with nothing to offer. But Egg insists, cracks jokes, teases him, and little by little, starts to prove his usefulness. Egg starts tending to the horses, fixes Duncan's makeshift armor, and observes everything with a much keener eye than he lets on. In several conversations, Egg questions Duncan about what it really means to be a knight, and Duncan, in his simple way, tries to answer as best he can. He talks about honor, courage, and loyalty, but always in a practical way, like someone who learned through the hardships of life. Egg, on the other hand, counters with sharp questions, showing that he thinks beyond the obvious, that he understands politics and power are behind every decision. These dialogues not only reveal the boy's curious innocence, but also Duncan's honorable heart, and most importantly, Egg sees in Duncan the purity of a true knight, while Duncan begins to notice in Egg a sharp mind that helps him navigate a world more complicated than he ever imagined. Arriving in Ashford, Duncan tries to register as a knight to participate in the joust. It's a tense moment, because he has no way to prove his lineage or any formal training, but his courage and demeanor convince the organizers to accept his registration. Egg, ever astute, keeps a close eye on everything, watching the other knights and making sharp comments, showing that despite his young age, he understands more about Westeros than Duncan realizes. The tournament itself is a mix of combat, rivalries, and social gatherings. Duncan crosses paths with princes, lords, and young knights, each bringing their own ambitions. The competition is fierce, but the real turning point in the story comes when he witnesses Aerion Targaryen, who would later be known as the Living Flame, mistreating the young Dornish performer named Tencel. Aelin destroys all her creations and humiliates her publicly, awakening in Duncan a sense of justice he can't ignore. The confrontation starts with harsh words, but soon turns into a challenge. Without thinking of the consequences, Duncan faces Aerion in front of everyone. Egg, on the other hand, is thrilled by his knight's courage, but also fears what might happen. This action shocks all the nobles present. After all, who is this nameless knight to stand up against a Targaryen prince? The outcome is inevitable. Duncan is arrested and accused of disrespecting the royal house. Duncan is then brought to trial. However, this trial is not simple. It's not just Duncan against Aeron, but rather a collective clash. Each side can choose champions to fight on their behalf. On one side, Duncan. He has the unexpected support of figures like Baelor Breakspear, who believes in his cause, and even other knights from the tournament who were moved by his courage. On Aeron's side are Rhaenyra Targaryen, who is Aeron's father and also the father of another character there, ready to crush the Hedge Knight. The atmosphere of the tournament changes completely. The celebration gives way to fear, and the stands turn into a courtroom. What was supposed to be an event of honor becomes a field of life or death, each blow charged with political tension. Duncan fights with all his strength and, even injured, manages to hold on. Meanwhile, Egg watches closely, anxious, rooting for him and showing for the first time just how much he already cares about his friend's fate. In the end, Duncan's victory comes with a tragedy. Baelor Breakspear dies in the process, sacrificing himself to save the young knight. This death affects not only those present, but everyone in the realm, showing how even the noblest can fall amid the intrigues and choices of Westeros. This outcome changes Duncan and Egg's lives forever. The Hedge Knight earns respect, but also the awareness that every act of justice comes at a price. As for Egg, by his side, he's no longer just a stubborn squire. He becomes a companion and apprentice, someone who sees in Duncan the example of what a true knight should be. And from there, their friendship solidifies and sets the tone for all the adventures still to come. And it's at this moment that Egg's true identity finally comes to light. After the trial by combat, while Duncan is still recovering from his wounds, as the tragedy of Baelor's death weighs on everyone, Prince Mikar approaches. It is he who reveals to Dunk that the skinny boy he's been calling Egg isn't just a simple squire, but actually Aegon Targaryen, his own son and the brother of Aerion and Daeron Targaryen. The revelation leaves Dunk in shock. He realizes that all this time, he's been treating a true prince of Westeros as his apprentice. At the same time, he understands why Egg knew so much about politics, why he was so bold, and why he could move so naturally among nobles and lords. The consequences are immediate. Dunk earns even more respect for having won the loyalty of a Targaryen, but he also starts to carry a heavier burden. From that moment on, he is no longer just a wandering knight with an unlikely shield. He is the guardian of a prince who, without anyone suspecting it at the time, would one day become king. This revelation seals their friendship for good and sets the stage for all the adventures yet to come. And here, folks, it's worth making a very important observation. A lot of people think that The Hedge Knight feels more like a self-contained movie since everything takes place at the Ashford tournament, but HBO is turning this tale into a full season of 6 episodes, expanding on every detail, from Dunk and Egg's journey to the political intrigue behind the scenes, the tournament rivalries, and the trial by combat. Besides that, the plan is for this to be just the first part of a trilogy, with 3 seasons adapting the 3 novellas published so far, just like I explained at the beginning of the video. In other words, what seems like a short story is going to get much more depth and room on television, building a complete series within this Westeros universe. And of course, all of this is happening under the supervision of George R.R. Martin himself. So guys, can you feel the weight that The Hedge Knight is going to have? A lot of people are already saying the show might be boring because it doesn't have dragons or big battles, but is that really a problem? If we think back to Game of Thrones, some of the most memorable moments in the series didn't have dragons or armies clashing. The Red Wedding, for example, was pure intrigue and tragedy without a single battle. The brutal fight between Oberyn and the Mountain also went down in TV history without needing dragons flying overhead. And even in House of the Dragon, episode 8 of the first season, which many consider the best of the series so far, didn't have any dragons in action or even any war. It was a completely political episode, focused on family drama and the tension of succession. In other words, Westeros doesn't need just fire and blood all the time to keep us hooked. What really makes this universe so addictive are the intrigues, the characters, and the choices that change destinies. That's exactly what the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is going to deliver, a more intimate yet equally powerful story. Now the question remains, can this series surpass House of the Dragon in quality? And maybe even be the most faithful adaptation of George R.R. Martin to this day? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because this discussion is far from over. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe here on Vidrigeo. That's it for today, folks. Thank you so much. See you in the next video. And I'm out.